Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Dogo Argentino Webinar Series, Part 3. My name is Amy Collins, and today our special guest is Daniel DeHulse. Welcome, Daniel.
Thanks, Amy. Great to be here with you guys.
So we're glad to have you here as well. I'd like to talk to you about the standard and how it ties into hunting. Can you start with the head?
Sure. I'm going to go ahead and share a little presentation I got to kind of get in the details on the head. So with the head structure, Antonio goes on for about 3 or 4 pages where he talks about different head types, and then he starts talking about the ideal head type for the Dogo Argentino to work as a gripping dog, but also to have the proper head structure to be a scenting dog as well. Something that was really important to Antonio was this idea of a convex concave head, and he talks about from the front, the top is convex, but also from the side, viewed from the front, the head is convex, being round in nature because of the strong temporal muscles that are on top of the head. And then he comes up with this 1-to-1 ratio, the ideal proportions, if you will, of the skull, so that the dogo can do its job. And you'll see here on the left, one of Antonio's actual dogo skulls. So starting from the occiput to this protrusion right here on the eye socket should be the same distance from that protrusion on the eye socket to about the tip of the nose. And the reason that he came up with that size is dogs like bulldogs, not the English bulldogs that we think of today, but and also mastiff type dogs that bite real hard. They have a shorter muzzle. They can bite real hard, but because of that shorter muzzle, when they actually catch and hold on to something, they have a smaller mouth. And that smaller mouth, he says, it's when it's full of prey or whatever it's catching, the dog doesn't have a sufficiently large mouth to be able to breathe out of the side of the mouth and to dissipate heat. So there you see the 1-to-1, which is important, but something that a lot of people, when they're looking at the 1-to-1, that they don't take into account is when we go to the bottom jaw, the bottom part of the skull, that should also be 1-to-1, equidistant. And here on the left, you can see a sighthound skull where they have the longer bottom jaw, but then going up to these masseter muscles, it's not the same distance as from the bottom of the jaw to the tip of the bottom jaw. And the Dogo Argentino, those should both be equal. So he talks about and this is translated, RP should be equal to PS. That the resistance, which is the tip of the bottom jaw, to the angle here represented by P, or power, should be the same distance as from the power to the support, which is at the back of the bottom jaw. So those two measurements should also be the same. You also notice this angle on the bottom jaw, and Antonio says in the original standard that the power in the dogo is generated by that angle on the lower jaw. So if you look at like the sighthound over here, it has kind of that flat bottom jaw and not much angulation, whereas the dogo has sufficient angulation and at the same time that angulation is equal on both sides. And then he gets into, so we're going to marry those two together, the top of the skull and the bottom jaw, to come up with what Antonio envisioned for the dogo. So there on the left, you have a pointer skull, and you'll see that what we call the muzzle, the nasal cavity is well developed in depth, large nasal cavity. And then to the right of that, you have a mastiff or a biting type skull where you have this very developed mandibular or lower jawbone, which is well developed, and not so developed over here on the pointer. The dogo takes the advantage that a scenting type dog has and then marries it to the strong bottom jaw of a biting or gripping type breed. And that's what you see over here to the right, is the marriage of those two components, so that the dog's able to wind, but also when it uses that nose and gets to where it needs to go and finds its prey, it's able to have that strength from that strong bottom jaw with the correct angulation and the correct proportions in length of the bottom jaw to catch and hold and stay caught. As Antonio called it, he said, I sought to harmonize these two extremes of olfactory and masticator or a biting type skull in the Dogo Argentino to obtain a general utility breed. So it's a dog that has a good nose and it can also bite hard. So that's kind of the physical structure of the bone. And then on top of that, we start getting into the muscle and the skin that's on the head. And as I said earlier, that the skull was designed that way to provide what Antonio calls a sufficient mouth. That's a mouth that's big enough to catch on to something, but still have enough room in the mouth where they can, and he was really scientific in the way that he said it, but basically to dissipate heat out of the side of the mouth so that the dog doesn't overheat. And this was really important for Antonio. You got to remember, he had grown up watching these fights with his brother and saw that dogs that didn't have a sufficiently large mouth or short mouth from the short muzzle and the short lower bottom jaw, that they would eventually let go, or they'd become overheated because they didn't have that ability because of the larger mouth to breathe out of the side. So here you can see a dogo that's caught, and there's two things that are going on when they're caught. They need to be able to dissipate heat, because you have to remember, dogs don't sweat like humans do. They don't have that type of cooling system. They're pushing a lot of that body heat out of the side of their mouth. And at the same time, they need to be able to breathe in to supply oxygen to the muscles. So it's twofold, the design of the mouth. But then you have the lips that they're not part of the mouth, but if they're too long, they can hang over the side of the jaw. And when the lips are too long, they act as a valve cover that basically stop the flow of heat out and the flow of oxygen in. So that's why Antonio talks about the dogo needs to have labios bien tirantes, very tight lips. And here you can see a dog with tight lips there on the left. You'll notice that the top lip doesn't extend below the bottom jaw. And then at the corner of the mouth, towards the rear of the mouth, is where they're able to breathe out and get rid of that heat, and at the same time breathe in. Another part, so we've talked about the skull, kind of the skin, the lips. Another important part of the dogo being able to hold and not let go are these powerful masseter muscles, the cheek muscles here circled in red. That's where their grip strength is coming from, are those very developed muscles, cheek muscles, and then on the top of the head, the temporal muscles. Now, in the previous FCI standard from 1999, they talked about how the cheek muscles should be semi-flat or flat. The new FCI standard from 2011 restores the original that says that the masseter muscle should be well developed. And then here on the right, you have a picture of one of Antonio's dogos. Right as he was about to go in and catch a puma, you can see those bulging cheek muscles. So everything in the head was well thought out, from being able to catch, stay caught, and at the same time having a large nasal cavity that can bring all that scent in so the dogo can hunt and find what they're looking for. Does that kind of answer your question, Amy, about the head structure and how it ties into the Dogo Argentino hunting?
It does. It's such an intricate design that the brothers created that it does explain. And thank you for explaining it in depth. So that does answer the question. Thank you. Very good. I have a question from one of the participants, Charles Sosa. He says, great information, Daniel. Can you clarify the standard of the lips, as this plays a role in the breathing and Y holding? And I know you kind of touched on that a little bit, but I want to make sure that.
Yeah, so the original standard, and I'll show you my sleeves because that's the word it uses. It says that the lips should be like sleeves that are rolled up really tight. You don't want any slack in those lips. And the standard, we have it as a DQ when those top lips hang below the bottom jaw. They should be above the bottom jaw, and that's so that they don't act as a valve cover that are basically cutting off the dog's cooling system, or the dog, and also their access to oxygen. So yeah, very tight lips are very important.
So we do all agree the head is the hallmark. It's the stamp of the breed. And let's talk about the rest of the standard, Daniel. I know that you were the one who translated it, put it in the AKC format. So if we could just go through that.
For those of you that don't know, originally we wanted to use the original standard, but it's not specific enough in parts. And then thankfully in 2011, they came out with the new FCI standard, which really was, they took the original standard that Antonio had created, got rid of some of the 1999 stuff like the flat cheek muscles, and they basically restored the original standard and the FCI standard. So we wanted to just use that standard with AKC, but AKC said, not anymore, maybe in the past, but now we have this format and everybody has to follow this format unless they were grandfathered in from like the 20s or 30s, whenever their standard was written. So we began that process of taking what was in the FCI standard and making it fit into the AKC format. And in that, there were a couple things that we had to change, the names in particular for certain certain components of the dog. Whereas the FCI has a lot of that scientific type language, AKC said it needs to be more user-friendly words that everybody would use. So for the 1-to-1 ratio, where it's talking about, you know, the tip of the nose to the process of the eye socket, they said no one's going to know what that little bone protrusion is. You need to come up with something else. And we're like, well, that's where it's supposed to be measured from. So talking with different members of the club and stuff, we found the closest approximation as far as wording for that was the brow bone, because that's pretty close to where that 1-to-1 is. So as we went through there were a lot of little things like that where we had to make minor adjustments. Didn't really want to, but I think we got it pretty damn close. And at the same time, having translated the original standard word by word and having to think about every single word and the meaning and the spirit of what it meant, I really had it in my heart and in my brain what the original standard was. So we made sure that the original, and especially where it really counts, like the very tight lips, the very developed masseter muscles, the angulation on the bottom jaw, all of that wording is in the AKC standard. So that's kind of just a little history of where we came up with the why the AKC standard is the way that it is. But, and kind of going back to your question, Amy, with the head moving down the dog, and I'll relate it to hunting and catching pigs and seeing hogs caught on pigs for long periods of time. Everything about the dogo is designed to make them a gripping dog and a dog that can stay caught. And, you know, as you move past the head, it says it goes into this strong neck, but at the same time, it's not a short neck. It has some length to it, and it puts a little bit of distance between the hog and the dog. And in the chance that they do get hit in the neck, you have this loose skin. And talking to one of the AKC judges, like, man, she's like, you guys have such hard requirements for this breed because you want this massive type head, but you don't want any droopy skin, and you want tight lips, but then right below it, you want this loose skin. She's like, that seems like a tall order. That seems like it would be hard to do to get these components just right. And that is the challenge with the dogo, having the very tight lips and then right below it having that loose skin. But as you move down the neck and you get to the withers, and it says that the withers are supposed to be high and very muscular. And if you look at some of the Mastiff breeds, they don't have this longer neck and higher withers. It's kind of just flat across. But the standard for the dogo says that they're supposed to be higher in the withers. And you have to remember that they're a scenting dog. They're not a dog that hunts with their nose to the ground. You know, I have cur dogs, and some of them have a little hound in them. They hunt totally different. They have their nose pinned to the ground, whereas the dogo, they're supposed to be up higher. Their head's supposed to sit up higher because they're supposed to scent rather than have their nose pinned to the ground. So even the structure of the withers is important. It's supposed to be high to put the head up higher. And then as it, you know, it slopes down the top line and then goes into the back line, it talks about how the shoulders are supposed to be well developed. And the reason for that is, and I've seen a lot of dogs that have weak shoulders or flat shoulders. That's what the dogo's using to anchor and push back when they're caught on that ear. They need those strong shoulders to dig into the ground. And they also need the really strong thigh muscles to basically, they do the same job as the shoulder. They act as an anchor. And Cherie, can you let me share my screen? So as we move down the back line and we get past the croup and we go down the rear, for whatever reason, there's this fad lately with these overangulated dogos. And I think it's kind of like a pendulum, where for a long time, dogos were pretty straight in the rear. And that pendulum's kind of gone to the other extreme in some cases, where they're basically overangulated. So if you were to look at the femur bone and the tibia, you have this really long tibia bone that kind of gives this angle that goes way back. Let's see. So this is what I'm talking about here. And this is one of the dogs that Amy and I at the Canine College, this is an actual picture that was one of the participants that actually, I think he won best in show or best of breed for the Dogo. And, you know, we took hundreds of pictures of the dogs and tried to match them as close to the FCI standard. And this is the dog that was the closest out of the dogs that we were able to get for the Canine College. So you look at the front angulation, and in our standard it says that they match. You're never going to have angles, and if you look at them, if I didn't put the numbers there, you'd think they're pretty close. But using a digital protractor, you can see that front angle is about 95 degrees, and then in the rear is about 105. But the dogs that are over-angulated, some of them in the rear are like 67 degrees, 70 degrees, 80 degrees. Have to remember that the Dogo has moderate angulation. So, you know, 105, 95, these are approximations. When you go through the AKC Canine College course, they talk about a lot of these degrees are plus or minus 10. It's hard to get them exactly, you know, just eyeballing the dog, especially for a judge. But all of this is set up to make it so the Dogo is quick enough to chase down whatever they're hunting. But then you have to remember, Antonio said the Dogo is more for fighting than it is for speed. So they're not the fastest dog. They're fast enough, but then they have this angulation, the proper angulation to be able to fight and hold once they get there. Kind of moving to the front of the dog, the front legs should be parallel to each other, and you'll see that at the pasterns they're pretty much perpendicular to the ground. They don't turn out to the left or right, easty westy. Let's see here. And then that chest goes below the elbows. So, you know, and all of this stuff that Antonio came up with, I've seen it out hunting. Viewed from the front, the Dogo should have that deep chest, but what a lot of people don't pay attention to is from the side, about the 9th rib or so, that brisket should be deep the whole way back. And that's to give the Dogo lungs. They need lungs to be able to fight. They need that, you know, for their cardio as they're fighting. That oxygen's what keeps the blood going. So deep chest, and a lot of times people want these really wide barrel chests. It's the deep chest where you get the full lungs that allow the Dogo to be able to run, but at the same time be able to fight. And then lastly on these pictures, as you look at the bitch there on the right, you can see those very strong hindquarters that allow them to anchor down or pile drive if they're fighting a puma, to give them that forward thrust to be able to drive it into the ground, you know, when they're caught on the neck.
So Daniel, last week when we spoke with Elsa, she was telling us that, in her opinion, that a more medium-sized dog, because of the running and the endurance. What is your opinion on that, on the build?
I would have said the same thing had I not seen it myself, but the dog with the greatest endurance I've ever seen was about 115 pounds. That dog in one of the earlier slides, Bravo, with the big mouth, he used to pull my friend who was about 250 pounds on the bike with a leash, and he would pull him down the country roads on his bike for 5 miles. I've seen dogs that weigh 80 pounds that don't have that type of endurance. Bigger muscles take more oxygen, but at the same time, big lungs can take in a lot of oxygen. So the standard set at 100 pounds, but this is one of those things that it's more in theory that a smaller dog has more endurance. I've seen big dogs have great endurance and small dogs have crappy endurance. And like Antonio said, race horses are proven on the track. So it doesn't matter if they look like they could hunt all day and they have the right build. In theory, you know, and Antonio was a scientist. You have a theory, but then you have to prove it. And he said, you know, thoroughbreds, race horses are proven on the track. So for those that are looking at breeding, yes, there's a standard for height and weight, and that should guide you. But at the same time, you need to put that dog and run it until it can't run anymore. And that's how you determine if the dog has enough endurance. I will say that the smaller dogs tend to be more agile when we're talking about hunting a river bottom and there's these big embankments that go up 30 or 40 feet. You know, I've seen little pit bulls run and keep trying to get up there and jump. I haven't seen a big old, you know, 110-pound dogo do something like that. So there is, for endurance, I've seen big dogs perform just as well, but when it comes to the agility side, and that's also very important in hunting, a smaller dog seems to be more agile. So it's, you have to experiment and get the best of both, because a dog that can run all day isn't worth a shit if it can't make it up an embankment. But a 30-pound pit bull that can make it up an embankment but doesn't have the size to really put the brakes on a hog is not as good either. So with the dogo, and I think this is where the size and the weight come into play, it's a happy medium between size and agility. And I would agree with Elsa, maybe not so much on the endurance side, but on the agility side, a little smaller dog, 85 to 90 pounds, being that happy medium.
And two, I think that's what works for you and your style of hunting, your terrain, because we know everyone hunts differently. So.
Yeah, but they always say there's only one dogo, and I think Elsa said the same thing. There's only one dogo, so we should all be working towards a homogeneous looking dog. They should be similar in size, similar in height, similar in weight, and that's where the standard comes into play. Now, you can run them a little thinner. You know, hunting weight is definitely different than show weight, unfortunately, but you know, I've had dogs that weigh 95 pounds, kind of fat, and you could take 10 pounds off of them in the summer months and get some of that fitness and that agility that comes with less weight.
What would you explain, or how would you tell an AKC judge on a dogo that's been conditioned to hunt? Because like you said, a dogo that's built for the show ring, and they're going to have a little more weight, no scars or battle wounds or anything like that. How would you explain that to an AKC judge?
So yeah, like with the top line, for example, it says that it gently slopes from the withers to the rear. But when a dogo's really developed in the shoulders, and then they have all these muscles along the back, it's not this gentle sloping kind of looks. And I've heard judges say you got to put a little fat on them so that it seems a little more rounded out, like on the top line. I think a good judge should be able to fill that fat in with their head. Dogos really should be presented in hard working condition. That doesn't mean skinny, and I think a lot of people mistake the two. They see bones and they're like, oh, that's a hunting dog. That's just a hungry dog. There should be bulging muscles, not flat muscles with bones showing. And you know, people will up the contrast or whatever on pictures to make them look more fit than they are. But for judges, the hard thing is getting it in their head that these dogs, they're supposed to chase stuff down and then kill it. I mean, there's no other way to put it. That's what they do. So judges need to look at the dogo and say, could this dog run for 5 miles and then fight whatever it catches, or 10 miles or 15 miles? Maybe not the most popular way to say things, but that's how I feel about it. Can you hear me, Amy?
Yes, something
Okay.
popped up on my screen. I apologize. Yeah, so I've talked to a lot of AKC judges, and for the most part, they're interested in how the dog performs, because that's what they want to see in the ring for overall as a dogo that can perform. That's what they're looking at and thinking in their head, can this dog do the job that it was bred to do? So that's great.
I wonder, like, how, you know, as a community, do we convey that to the judges so that, you know, I was talking to another judge and she said AKC has a tendency to pick the finer, more delicate, smooth dogs, and you can see it with dogs like the Doberman. You know, that's my fear, that eventually the dogo will become finer boned, sleeker lines. It's how do we convey that to the judges that the dogo's a prize fighter? You know, you never see a fat guy show up to fight Mike Tyson. If he does, he gets his ass knocked out, you know.
I think just more education, and like we're doing right now, having this conversation about the breed and doing more and more of this in the future, and providing the judges seminars that will convey that message.
Yeah.
I know there's a couple more questions popping up here. Let me see what we have.
Sure.
The skull diagram that you showed earlier had a missing premolar P4. So do some dogos have missing molars, and is that acceptable?
So that was a skull from one of Antonio's dogs that he boiled and cleaned and used for his article in the magazine. The standard says, and like Horacio told me, Antonio preferred a full mouth. So it is preferred. Is it the end of the world? In my opinion, no, it's not. There's a lot of other things that I would worry about instead of 2 little teeth, you know, that are that small that they don't really catch with anyways. But yes, they should have a full mouth, but there's been world champions that are missing premolars. And Dogo del Año, Dogo of the Year, there have been dogs that are missing top and bottom premolars. So when you talk about the dogo, and people get fixated on certain parts, and, you know, to be cliche, they can't see the forest because of the tree. Don't get caught up on just one little tooth when the rest of the dog is perfectly harmonious, or close to perfectly harmonious. And that's how the dog should be judged, is for their overall harmony.
Another question. Remember the ancestral and the modern day use of this breed. I would be honored to have a hard-bodied hunter in my ring. So this is coming from an AKC judge who is here with us today.
Oh,
so
cool.
It's more of a statement than a question. So it's definitely.
And I think it goes with the history of the breed, where Antonio talks about him and his brother watching these dog fights, and he calls them gladiators. And like I said, right or wrong, that was the culture, and that's where the dogo comes out of. And he talks about how they were conditioned and they were made for combat. And when I look at a dogo, that's what I try to see, like, can this dog go the distance with something as big as itself or bigger? And, you know, along those same lines, talking about the courage of the dogo, you see the courage of the dogo when it goes against something its own size or something bigger, or twice its size, or 3 times its size. And do they have the body to match?
Right, exactly. Do they have what it takes to complete their mission, basically, what they're set out to do? Here's another question. I know last week we talked about the hare foot versus the cat-like foot. Do you have a preference? And is there something in the Diana magazine about it?
Yes, it is in the Diana magazine, and it's specific. It says they should have very tight toes. So you have hare foot, you know, which is splayed out. Dogos are supposed to have tight cat feet. And even with my cur dogs, I've seen that they have tight cat feet. It makes for a better foot going over different types of terrain, be it rocky terrain, river bottoms where there's a lot of logs and basically like obstacles. Those tight feet that aren't splayed out, they don't get as injured as much. And then for the aesthetics, it's kind of part of the signature of the when you're looking at a dogo from the front, is those tight toes versus those hare feet. And honestly, like, I hate hare feet. I think they look so nasty on a dogo. They have to have them tight, small toes.
I totally agree. I prefer that. Can you, let's answer another question.
Real quick on that also, you'll see that, so as you go down the front legs and, you know, your columns of support at the pastern, and Antonio says it should be perpendicular. So, you know, like this, there should be a little lean back in the pastern, but with the dogs that are real sloppy in the pastern, you also see them toes splayed out. So as the pastern gets closer to perpendicular, but not perpendicular, you know, it brings the toes up a little bit. So I find it's with the dogs that have too much angulation in the pastern, they also kind of have the feet that splay out.
And that is going to be difficult to me for a dog to hunt hours upon hours in the night running through the terrain.
Yeah, they need to have a little bit of elasticity in that pastern, but too much slop, you know, over time is gonna wear on the foot.
Exactly, it'll break down. Here, let's see. There's another question. How do the traits of contributing breeds pop up in the dogo? What's called the drag of the breed, like oversized from the Dane, for example?
Yeah, I'm not a geneticist, so whatever I'm saying is just kind of my observation and what I think. But as far as like some of the dogs that we see right now, there were, and I don't know how to put it nicely, breeders in Argentina that were mixing in Great Dane in the 90s used to have these very tight lips on dogos, and then later on in the 90s you see these nasty pendulous lips. I think we're starting to move away from that, but Great Dane for sure seems to still plague the breed when it comes to the head structure, or more the lips. And then to go, maybe not so much the drag, but what is in the dogo that is important, and that's the heart of the dogo, is that fighting dog of Cordoba. But I think as we've bred for a certain look, that heart has started to diminish quite a bit. And you'll see dogs, you know, they perk up in the ring and they wag their tail and they're all aggressive and everything, but one-on-one with a pig or something, they wuss out. So It's kind of disheartening and discouraging, and should be a warning at the same time that just because a dog looks tough, you know, and we were talking about it's important for them to have a certain look, but race horses are proven on the track. You don't know what you have until you put it one-on-one with something, and it has to go the distance. And all those other components will come into play, you know, like the nasty long lips and stuff. But to the original question, yeah, I see problems kind of with the Great Dane. And then there was another breeder that was breeding in boxers. And I think there's a lot of lines where you see those really short muzzles. And it seems like the head's the most important. And those two things were very detrimental, putting lippy dogs in there and then dogs with short muzzles in the 90s and in the 2000s. And we see a lot of those dogs still, and people think they're impressive. You know, they have these blocky kind of short muzzles or whatever, but it's not a dogo.
Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about the standard and how it helps with hunting? And
no, just and I probably already said it, but just drive home that all of those components, they're not arbitrary. And there are a couple that maybe are aesthetics, like the all white coat, and yeah, so they can see them run around in the woods. But for the most part, 99% of it's for function, and they're not arbitrary. They're there for a reason, and it's our duty to make sure that they still have the very developed cheek muscles, the very tight lips, and everything else that goes into making a dogo. And that's just the structure, you know. And then there's a whole other side of the courage and the heart and what a dogo is supposed to be.
Before we get to that, though, let's talk about the controversial pirate patch.
I hate pirates. No, not really. I know
you're not a fan.
No, honestly, and it's just to bust people's balls sometimes. I think it's a fad, like, you know, the tribal tattoos were for a while. But I'll be honest, in the overall scheme of things in the dogo, it's not that important if it's not bigger than the 10%. I like them all white, but that's a personal preference. But if I had a dogo that, you know, and I'm preaching harmony, if everything else is harmonious on a dog and he has a patch, you know, this big, and he has heart, and then I have another dog that's completely white and it's a wuss, I'll take that pirate patch any day over it. But for those that care, I kind of, let's see, share this. Can you see that, Amy?
Yes.
So if we could get a dogo head and I could take it into work, I could scan it with one of our tools and get the exact surface area of a dogo head, but we can't do that. So the closest thing that I could come up with, you know, an approximation to the overall surface area is you take the muzzle. Can you see my pointer, like the little arrow?
Yes.
Or no? Okay,
I can see it.
You take the muzzle, which is a truncated cone, and I got that terminology talking with Lucho Milla. You know, we were talking about this block on a block thing that's in some Valino's book, and the dogo's not a block on a block. It even says it uses concave and convex curves to describe it, not straight lines. So anyways, the truncated cone is round, and then it tapers to the front, but not dramatically. It's not like an ice cream cone. And there's a formula for that. So you can calculate the surface area of a truncated cone. And then number 3 right here is not exposed. It's where the skull meets the muzzle. So you would subtract this which is you just take the surface area of a circle, subtract that, and then you go over to the skull, which is, it's not a perfect sphere, but it's the closest that we can come up to without actually using a ferro arm and scanning the whole head. And you take the surface area of the skull, and also right here, I didn't put the black line, but you can see you would also subtract where the muzzle is inserted to that sphere. You subtract that, and then you subtract this part where the neck goes into the base of the skull, because obviously that's not exposed either. So surface area of the truncated cone, surface area of the sphere minus the parts that aren't exposed. We did about 10 dogs, had people on doc, hey, can you take these measurements? So you take all these measurements, I plug it in and do the formulas and come up with an average surface area. And to make it easy, it's about the size of my palm, maybe a little bigger, which I was surprised. Like, I think it looks nasty to see a patch that big on the side of their, you know, over their eye or whatever, but doing the math, that's roughly the 10% of the surface area.
I was surprised too. I thought it would be smaller myself.
Yeah, I was disappointed that it wasn't, but, and under here's not really exposed, but the standard doesn't say from the judge's view looking down, it just says the total surface area. So, but in the original standard, Antonio, when he talks about the patch, he uses the word tolerar, tolerate. So there's kind of this, he didn't really like it. It's just something that's tolerated. But again, you need to look at the overall harmony of the dog rather than just fixating. The same like the premolars. Don't fixate on it just because it has a patch. You have to look
as long as it's not 10%, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I'm not a fan of the pirates either. They're okay, but I have one laying right here beside me, so.
And I've had a pirate patch that was the whole side of her face.
Yes, I remember.
I bred her, and all of the puppies were completely white. And I've never had a spot on any dog. They've all come out white. So, you know, breed a dog with a patch that big and they're still all white. So, and I wouldn't rule out a dog for breeding just because they have a patch. You know, she was really tenacious and was catching twice her size at 6 months. I could give two shits about the pirate patch. Everything else was good. So you have to experiment a little bit.
I have a couple more questions. What is the importance of dark pigment, especially as it applies to hunting?
To what was that again?
What is the importance of the dark pigmentation, especially when it applies to hunting? Is darker skin less prone to traumatic injuries?
I don't know. To be honest, in theory, people say if they have more pigment, they have less allergy problems. I have seen with the eyeliner and the lips, because my dogs live outside 100% of the time. It's hot as hell in Texas. Their eyelids around the eyes don't get sunburnt like dogs that are, you know, and I'm super white. And when I go out in the sun, I get sunburnt. It's the same for dogs. So if anything, just from the UV light point of view, it helps them to not get sunburned. I've seen with dogos though, for the most part, they do seem to have more allergy problems than like say cur dogs as far as hot spots and stuff.
Very good. Let's see if we have any more questions relating to these topics. Can you tell me about hunting? What are your hunting styles? Do you use cut vests or cut collars, tracking systems?
Yeah, so I've hunted every which way. Sometimes we'll do let's just hunt with dogos, cur dogs, let them all run loose together, walking them in. It depends on where you're hunting, terrain, if it's a feedlot. And I think to be a successful hunter, you need to be able to adapt to whatever the terrain, whatever the situation is. Sometimes it's fun to just go out with all dogos and see how they work. Sometimes if there's going to be, there's going to be a lot of hogs or whatever, and there might be 5 or 6 catches, it's better to have a little more precision. Let the cur dogs bay up, walk in, catch one, regroup, rather than having 3 or 4 dogos going and finding their own pig and getting locked up, 30 minutes away from each other, which I've had happen and got dogs killed, just because one's all the way over here and one's over here, and you go and kill one. By the time you get to the other, maybe he got a cut, got hit in the squirter vein or whatever, and was bleeding out for 30 minutes. So it depends on where you're hunting, the terrain, the pig density, the hog density. There's a lot of factors, but you want the dogo to be able to use its nose. They have decent noses. I've seen that throughout the years. They can find their own pig. You just need to be careful, because with time you'll eventually run into the wrong circumstances, and you'll have dogs caught, a mile apart. And I've seen that. As far as cut vests, I've always used cut gear unless it's just really hot, but I've pretty much just used like a breastplate. It just covers the shoulders, and I've only had one dogo get cut past that. Dogos are supposed to go head on. Cur dogs will flip around, and that's when they get hit in the rear, hit in the side or whatever. But I'd say 95% of the hits on a dogo are in the chest and shoulders and neck. So as long as that's covered, I've only had one dog get hit in the side, and that's actually because they were in a stock tank, and he was going up to the pig, and the pig kind of went underwater and then hit him under the water in the rib. And that was kind of scary, because he's swimming and the pig comes running out of the water, and I go chasing the pig, and one of my friend's daughters, she looked and she saw the dogo sinking. It had hit him in the rib, and he was getting water in there and started to sink or whatever. But that's the only time that I can remember that I've ever had a dogo get hit in the side. So as far as cut gear, just cover the front and the neck and on the shoulders to a degree. I don't like the vests that go all the way to the hind legs. I think you have to weigh the protection versus their agility and their ability to cool themselves, because I've seen more dogs die from getting overheated than I have from getting hit or whatever when they have the cut vest on. So that's why I call them the Burkinis, the ones that are shorter, that allow them their body to kind of have, when they're in a stock tank or whatever, and they get out, they can kind of cool off. That's another thing, is those long vests, they become real heavy when they're in the water. Once we were at this lake, and the dogs were out there for an hour just swimming around, and the dogs can't really see where the pig's at, and that lake was like a half a mile across, and if you can imagine if they had one of those long vests trying to swim in it for an hour. So yeah, just protection in the front. And I always use GPS. It has failed me, but for the most part, the Garmin's helped me a lot and saved dogs, got me to, if I didn't have it, dogs would be dead, wouldn't be able to find them. So always use GPS. especially if you're running like go yonder dogs, like my dog Waylon, where they're 1.5 miles, 2 miles away. There's just, you have to use GPS.
Yes, with the long range antenna. What would you put in your cut kit? What kind of?
First off, staple guns. You can get them at esutures.com. You can buy the expired ones. They're a few bucks a piece. I would get the wide 35. It says 35W, 35 wide. Those ones help to pinch the skin. You know, they have a bigger reach to be able to staple up dogs. I've probably gone through 20 or so of those over the years, and they just make it so much easier than stitching up by hand. Sometimes you have to stitch up by hand, but I took some to Argentina for some friends, and they're like, man, these things are awesome. They're so convenient. They're cheap, they're fast, and if you get a staple remover, they're really easy to take out. Yeah, so make sure you buy a staple remover too, or else you're gonna have to, they're kind of harder to get out without a staple remover. And another thing is vet wrap. I think it's made by 3M. This is more with cur dogs when they get hit in the guts and you stuff the guts back in, but you're out in a cornfield and you don't really have anywhere to sew them up. You can vet wrap them up and then carry them out. It keeps everything inside till you can get to the tailgate or something. So definitely, and I've had 2 dogs where that happened, and the vet wrap kept everything where it was supposed to be until you can get where they need to, you know, where they can get fixed up properly.
Very good. Did you have any slides that you wanted to show us? With any pictures?
One more thing on the cut kit is the cat gut sutures if you need to sew up muscle. So sometimes they get cut to the bone. You don't just want to staple that up. You want to sew that up first. People are like, well, why don't you take them to the vet? Sometimes you might be 3 or 4 hours away from a vet and they're just bleeding and you have to do something. So.
Right, it's preservation of life till you can get them there. So it's always good to have that cut kit full.
Yeah, you really might be 3 or 4 hours away from a vet. So.
Very good.
What was the other question you asked? Sorry.
I didn't know if you had a slide that you wanted to show us in regards to this or with the gripping.
Let's see here. So people ask me what's, you know, because Antonio says, I call them kind of like the pillars of the dogo. He says that it's the dog with the most grip, and then he says courageous above all else. And to the question of what's the dog with the most grip, here's Antonio right here on the left with Anya. You know, after 45 minutes, he still can't get the dog off, and he has to get a goat horn, brake stick, and pry the dog off. That's what having grip is. You know, 40 something minutes. We can't do that nowadays, and you know, times have changed. But and then on the right there, you see Tupi del Totoral. That's a puma with all of his claws. He weighed about 200 pounds. 800 people watched that, and you see the dogo fighting a puma with all of his claws and teeth that was caught in the wild. It wasn't, you know, one of these little babies that they have on a chain. It was a wild caught puma, and he was on him for 45 minutes. And then, you know, Dupi ended up winning, and they broke him apart. This may be unsavory, or, you know, but to understand the origins of the breed and what having the most grip is, this is what it is. And, you know, some of these people that were there are still alive. or they knew Antonio. So, you know, deep down in the dogo, and hopefully not too deep down, there's still this tenacity and this ability to grip. And there is a difference between, you know, tenacity and heart and courageous. You know, when Antonio says above all else the dogo's courageous, that's kind of hard to say what that is, but it's not being afraid of anything, be it terrain, you know, flying off of an embankment into a river, or going up against something that's twice its size, and then having the tenacity and the physical and muscular structure when they get there to actually follow their heart and do something.
Very good. Can you talk to us about movement? Oh, what's this photo here you're showing us?
So
Can you
this
explain
is
the photo?
Yeah, this is my dog Matako, and this is one of those cases where the Garmin crapped out on me and couldn't find him. You know, just kept walking around in the woods, and he had found his own pig. And after about 45 minutes, you know, and he got cut, but there comes a point where, you know, there's just so much exertion. I found him next to the pig. They were both laying down, and well, like pretty much passed out, fought till couldn't go anymore. You know, and that to me is that courage, not just, oh, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, you know, or even, you know, 15 minutes. He was there the entire time with that pig, and I attribute him being okay to, you know, his cut vest. You know, he got cut there on the front leg, but and also just the conditioning, the lung capacity, being ready for the job, not being overweight, not being out of shape, but, you know, all of those little things add up. Too fat, not conditioned, not good lung capacity or lung conditioning. All those things can add up against the dog, but when they're all in place, it gives them a better chance. And then on top of it, you have the cut vest. So there was nothing really in the chest or the neck in any of the vitals. So
That was a good thing. How old was he in this picture?
probably 3. I think that was 2012. Yeah,
He was quite the warrior.
Yeah, and then he ended up, you know, hunting for several more years after that. So I am a proponent of the cut gear and all that stuff. It saves lives, and I would have got there quicker had it not been for the GPS, but sometimes that happens.
Right. Let's talk about movement. I know we talked a lot about the standard, but tell me, what is the ideal movement of the dogo, in your opinion?
So going off of that structure that they have, and the angles in the front and the rear should be similar, close to each other. I have seen dogs that are kind of short in the upper arm, which kind of makes for a choppy movement as they're running. They need to have a longer upper arm, so they have more of a stride, and then that powerful rear that drives them. And as they're moving, as they're interested, you know, I love watching the dogos out hunting. They lift their nose up, their tail goes up, and, you know, the top line will level out a little bit, but they need to have good reach with the front, and then that powerful rear train that's moving them forward.
Very good. There's a couple questions here. One is, how many years will you hunt a dogo for? When do you decide to retire your dogos after they've hunted?
I think it's like anything. You kind of know when their time's up, when their performance starts to go down. Like with Matako, I could just see he wasn't quick as he was before. And all of those injuries add up. Like once he was going 100 miles an hour and flew off of it was basically a cliff and landed down on the bottom, and landed on some rocks. So over time they get beat up, just being out in the woods and stuff. And when you start to see them slow down, you don't want to put them in a position where they're going to get hurt. So at least I don't. Right. You know, when I see that they're not at their prime anymore, and it's okay if they're not at their prime, but if a dog starts getting cut more, slower to get to where the other dogs are at, or they just don't have as much drive, it might be because they're just old and beat up. It's time to let them be a yard dog or a house dog. What is that age? I would say 6 or 7. But I've seen dogos hunt longer than that. My dog Waylon, he's 11 and he still hunts like he's 4. So, but he's also not getting beat up all the time either. He's just a bay dog, and then a Me Too dog. He jumps in when the dogos get there. So.
Let's see. What is important to you, Daniel, about hunting your dogs? Can you tell me about your choice and your hunting? And let me rephrase that. Please tell me about your choice to hunt a dog for yourself.
I'm not sure I understand it. Like my personal criteria?
Yeah, I think what's your I think that's what they're asking. Jessica, if you can maybe expound on that. What is important about your dogs and hunting? I guess in your personal preference and opinion.
So for me, when it comes to the dogo, it's those 2 pillars. It's the dog with the most grip and courageous above all else, and having the ability to catch and stay caught. And I like clean holders, dogs that just bite once and don't let go. I don't like dogs that sit and chew and regrip, and then the dog has to be agile. I like dogs that can get under barbed wire fences, that can jump over logs, can swim across creeks and rivers and swim in lakes. The nose, honestly, is not the biggest deal to me. It is important to have a decent nose, but I think there's breeds out there that have way better noses than dogos. And some of the places I've hunted that are 10,000 acres, and the pig population's not very dense. You'd be lucky to catch something with only dogos. You need go yonder dogs with cold noses. But that's just me. I want the dogo, once something is found, be it half a mile away or whatever it is, to get in there and stay caught and be courageous, be it 80-pound pig or a 400-pound pig.
Very good. Did you have any other information you wanted to provide with hunting and hunting styles, or?
I would say with hunting, as long as you're out there with your dogs doing something, it's better than not doing anything at all. And I think sometimes us hunters, it gets a little competitive, like back and forth, who catches more hogs or bigger hogs. Or I think as a whole, though, we have to look at it as a dogo community. As long as they're out there doing something, as long as they're out there hunting. And there's 15 different styles that you could hunt and different terrain and whatever. Any type of hunting is better than none at all. And if you can't hunt, then some other type of activity where you're wearing the dog out and they're tired. Because I don't think they make good house pets if they're not tired. They're, you know, from the earlier slide, you see what they're bred to do. That's not a dog that's just meant to be on the couch. At least a well-bred one. They have that heart, that tenacity. They like a challenge. They like to go after, you know, large game, big animals. And also as far as their, you know, their mental health, I think Dogos that don't have a job can become destructive. So whatever type of hunting it is, it's better than none. And if you can't hunt and all you can do is run your dog around the block and run a few miles a day, something is better than nothing. And I think a lot of these cases where people end up wanting to get rid of their dog is because the dog doesn't have a job, and then they still have that heart inside of them, and it just kind of eventually boils over and they end up becoming destructive and doing things that they shouldn't do.
So do you think it's okay to place dogos in a pet home?
I think I've placed a couple in pet homes with, you know, contingent on that they would work the dog in some capacity, be it protection work or hunting. And ideally, I think that's where they should be. That's just me. I don't think everybody needs a dogo, honestly. I think for the breed to really be preserved and maintained the way that Antonio intended, it needs to be with people that are going to hunt it, or at least wear the heck out of the dog by running it a lot and giving it challenging things to do, weight pull or whatever. And yes, there's always exceptions. There are people that will make good pet homes and certain dogs that are good pet dogs. But as a whole, I don't think that should be the concept or the philosophy for this breed, that we're going to create or breed towards more docile and gentle and good pet dogs. They're hot-blooded dogs, just like thoroughbred racehorses. You know, they're bred for being hot, and if you want a dog that's more for leisure saddle riding, there's a different type of horse for that. I think the same with the dogo. It's not the greatest pet, but that's just my opinion.
This is from a participant. My wife said that in Argentina they use dogos as home security. Would you recommend a dogo for such?
Yeah, so my wife's from Argentina, and walking around the block, a lot of people have dogos and they're really mean. And a lot of people do have them for home protection. I will say in Argentina, they are very good about containment. By containment, I mean fences and walls. So like at my wife's house in Argentina, where they had one of my dogos, the wall's like 9 feet tall. It's solid brick. The entrance is all welded steel. So there's no chance of the dog getting out and mauling somebody or mauling a kid. And the only way that the dog's going to get somebody is if they go over the top of the wall. So yeah, and it's in the original standard that they can be used as home guardians. And I've seen it in Argentina with my own eyes. If you're going to have a dog as a guardian dog, you need to have the facilities, you know, high enough fence and concrete where they can't dig out. Otherwise, you're asking for trouble.
Let's talk about temperament. What's the ideal temperament in the dogo?
If you ask, you know, a lot of old school dogueros, you might get different answers from different people. For me, I look at it more from the hunting perspective. I don't like dog aggressive dogos. At the same time, they shouldn't be a pushover. So, you know, they should be confident, but they should be able to work with other male dogs, and females should be able to work with other females. That's key to having a successful hunting pack. That also takes a strong leader, but it is also breeding. There are some lines that are just dog aggressive, no matter how much love and discipline and whatever else you give them. A lot of it comes down to genetics, but for me, temperament, they have to be able to be around other dogs. And it doesn't mean they can go to dog parks either and, you know, romp around and play with a bunch of other dogs. I think that's dangerous. But when they're out hunting, they have a different mindset. So as long as they can work together when they're out in the field, that's the temperament that I'm looking for. Now, as far as the guardian side, I live out in the country. My neighbors are far away. My dogs don't see a lot of people. I don't have kids. And if someone comes up on my property, like the UPS guy, I hear him go nuts in the back. I like that. I like dogs that are protective of their territory. But at the same time, when I have friends over for a barbecue or something, I'll bring out a dog or two, and they see that I'm okay with that person, and then they let them pet them. So you have to be careful, you know, when you're talking about having guardian dogs. They should come down real quick when they're like, oh, this is Dad's friend, it's okay to be around them. And I've been around dogos that, you know, sit and growl at me, not my dogs, but at other people's places. I can't stand those kind of dogs. I think they're dangerous. So a level-headed dog, as far as, you know, around the property and around friends and family.
Yeah, a dog that's working is going to be more confident. There's a difference between guardian and aggressive. And
yeah, for sure.
I have a question about hunting. So what do you think that it's just equally as important as to hunt a female as a male, or vice versa?
I don't think it matters. For whatever reason, with my cur dogs, all my best ones have been males. The downside to females is they come into heat. I have a friend that, you know, if he's not breeding the females or he's bred them a couple times to not have that headache, he spays them all. That would be the downside with females, is when they come into heat or they're close to or after they've gone through their heat, can cause problems. But I think females, in fact, probably my favorite dogo of all time that I've seen hunting and catch was a female. I think she caught harder than any male. So as far as their tenacity or their heart or their strength, females can even outshine males. It's just when it comes down to the practical side of their heat cycle, sometimes it's a pain in the butt.
I agree. I think once that female has shown you that she can perform and do that in the woods, then it's okay to put her up. She's a brood bitch. She has a primary function to keep producing your stock. So
yeah, they're what keep your hunting pack well stocked, and so yeah.
Another question:
Sure.
What do we need to do as breeders to preserve the breed?
Those two pillars, the dog with the most grip and courageous above all else. And I mean, everything else is secondary to that. So dog might not have the best structure. I'd rather have a dog that doesn't have the greatest structure, but has the pillars of the most grip and the most heart, versus a phenomenal looking dog that is a wuss, is scared, won't catch, puts its tail between its legs. By the definition, for me, that's not a dogo. So that takes some sacrifice. That takes getting out in the woods, and a lot of people say, well, where I live, I can't do that. You need to do what you need to make it so that you can select and breed for that. And I know some of the most dedicated Dogo people have moved to where they're able to hunt, or they travel a lot to be able to hunt, and see if that dog has the endurance, see if it has the heart and is able to perform in the woods. So there's that aspect. And then of course, just following the standard. And I think that that's incremental. There's always going to be things that you can improve on your line. Maybe a little more pigment around the eyes, pigment on the lips, a little better angulation here and there, little tighter toes, but you need to have those pillars in place.
Can you tell us what faults you consider to be okay and can be approved upon versus the ones that just make a dog not breed worthy, in your opinion? What's okay and what's not okay?
Well, there's the obvious things like health. So bad hips, it's a no-go. Any of the health stuff, I think that should be a given, that any of the health stuff is a no-go, no matter how beautiful the dog is. And then as far as like faults, or, you know, as far as the structure and the dog, I think you need to weigh everything kind of mathematically, add up what good they have and what bad they have, and look at the overall dog, not just, oh, this dog has hair feet, I'm not going to breed it. I know some people might say, well, if the dog has X wrong with it, I would look at the, you know, first off the overall health, but then the rest of the dog. And I've heard top breeders in the world say they have and will breed undershot dogs if it has something that they want. So I don't think there's any make it or break it thing, unless it's related to health or bad hips or bad elbows. I think the dog needs to be looked at as an overall dog, not just like, I don't like this one little thing about him, I'm not going to breed him. Because then we would never breed anything, because there's always something wrong with the dog.
Right, because there's no perfect dogo, no perfect dog. So if you find an attribute that you see that could work with something else, then
there are some things to think about, like yellow eyes. If they had really light colored eyes, no. A really short muzzle, no. Round, you know, big round eyes, no. Like droopy skin on the face, no. But I would never seek those dogs out. I would never get them in the first place. And, you know, a dog that's really straight in the rear, I think for breeding, you want to try and get as close as you can to the standard, instead of like going through a bunch of garbage and breeding and breeding and breeding. People before us have already done all that, and we're closer to what it should be. So seek out what has the most of what you already want, or is closest to the standard, rather than breeding generation after generation of dogs that, you know, have obvious faults.
can you talk to us about pigmentation in the body spots versus what's acceptable and not?
The original standard, Antonio says, they shouldn't have any black on the skin, but over time, a lot of dogueros have said, you know what, my dogs with black skin seem to have less health problems, less allergies, better hearing. From my point of view, the skin could be all black as long as the hair is white. In fact, you know, on a dog with good hair, you really can't see the skin underneath unless when you get them wet. And like Matako, when he was older, I'd wash him down and his skin was completely black. So I think they can have black all over the body. I really don't, it doesn't bother me.
Here's another question here. I know that you said flat shoulders can hurt the dog with their ability to anchor down. How do you fix that?
Breed to dogs with good shoulders.
Right.
I think it's, you know, like me, I'm kind of genetically set to how big I can get, how fast I can run. And it's the same with dogs. I can work out all I want. I do not have the genetics to be like Arnold Schwarzenegger. And that's what I was saying is you want to get the closest approximation to what the dog should be rather than getting a crappy dog and trying to do a whole bunch of running and weight pulling. Yeah, you're going to put some muscle on them, but genetics are pretty much the blueprint that says your body will develop this way. And yes, food and exercise can influence that, but genetics is the framework. So look for the dogs that have the shoulders you want and breed those type of dogs.
So there's another question. This is, I don't know if anyone else is going to have any questions, but they want to know why the bitch makes the breed. Do you think the bitch makes the breed?
That had to have been Cassie. I don't know that the bitch makes the breed. They definitely produce the babies that keep the breed going, but you also have to have the male. I think it's 50-50. And I haven't seen it in print, but one of my friends in Argentina told me that Antonio used to say, looking at a male and a female from a distance, you shouldn't be able to tell which one's the male and which one's the female. And our standard does say that they should be distinctly feminine, but not lacking substance. And those are the type of females I like, are strong, maybe borderline doggy bitches, strong females. I think they should be close to the males as far as substance and presence. But they are still distinctly feminine, but I don't personally think bitches make the breed. I think it takes two, male and female.
Very good. Well, did you have anything else that you wanted to add today, Daniel, that you think is very important for our participants to know about the Dogo? Or
no, just maybe ask forgiveness if I get a little worked up and rowdy. I really feel this in my heart of hearts. I like curse words. I'm a little rough around the edges, but this is all, you know, it comes from within. It's a passion. It's almost a craziness, if you will. And, you know, going 15 years strong, the breed still, it gives me a lot of excitement and passion. And I live in Texas, so I can hunt. I'm originally from Utah. And I think that that's something that Americans lack. Talking to breeders from Argentina is that passion, the willingness to make sacrifice to really ensure that the dog's good looking on the outside, but has the heart on the inside. So this breed will make you go a little crazy, but a good crazy. And I think passion, don't be scared of it when it comes to the breed. And that's it.
there's another question about the lips and the Spanish word. I'm not gonna try to butcher it, so you can tell me what. They're asking about the full content notes with the word, the Spanish word. Also tent, suspenders.
Arremangado. Tirante.
Tirante? Is it tirante? Did I say it right?
Yeah, tirante means tight.
Okay.
So it says labios bien tirantes. And that's just very tight lips. But then he said, like I said earlier, they should be rolled up like sleeves. They shouldn't be hanging down. They should be nice and tight like this.
I hope that answered your question, Juan. So does anyone else have any questions before we close today? Well, Daniel, if you do not have anything else to add, I guess this will be the wrap. But we really appreciate you taking time out of your day to spend with us and just talk about a breed that we all love.
Thank you. And I'd also like to thank you, Amy, for doing the interview, and Ashley, Douglas, and Cherie for setting all this up. I think it's awesome. It's cool, especially in these times of pandemic where it's hard to get together around a campfire and you know, talk dogos. So I'd like to really thank them, and I think they're kind of pioneering the way. I'd like to see this type of activity, these webinars continue. I think it's a good thing, and get a whole spectrum, gamut of different people. You know, we all have different opinions, but I think the more that everybody's able to listen to different people, the better. Oh, that's it.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Cherie and Ashley. And thank you again, Daniel. So until next week, bye everyone.
All right. Bye.